Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. Welcome to another live stream. Hope you're doing all right. I'm just going to need a minute to get some things sent out. Let's see. All right. Hi, Kenneth. Hope you and your family are all well. They are. Thank you very much. When Paul speaks of psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, how does one refute that he is talking about exclusive psalmody and worship? I don't know that there's a good way to definitively refute it. I think we can just point to the fact that there are all different kinds of psalms and hymns in early Christianity, and even some scholars still think that Philippians 2 is some pre-existing hymn that Paul is making reference to. But if you look in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see a wide variety of different hymns and psalms in addition to what are considered canonical. So there's a lot going on beyond what is in the canon. But sometimes people don't want to consider that valid evidence. All right, I'm just going to post this link in a couple places. Welcome, everybody. Kia ora from Aotearoa. Hi, Isaac. Do you know that Pleasant Green guy? I don't think that rings a bell. Hello in St. Paul. I was there a handful of years ago. It was a lovely area. I wanted to do some fishing, though. Hi, Barb. Hi, Dressen. What do you think of the question about the historicity of the patriarchs? I think the scholarly consensus is that the patriarchs are not historical, that they were definitely not related to each other, that we have three different traditional cycles that were lined up and turned into a single lineage, because there was a need to kind of unify the different tribes, and they thought a genealogical unification was the best way to go about that. What up, Maro? Thank you for the kind words. Duncan says, hi, Dan. Was the Essene Qumran community a small faction or one of the three major sects in Jerusalem? Well, they were outside of Jerusalem, further east, down by the northwestern shores of the Dead Sea. And the Essenes were probably they weren't one of the main factions. They weren't the most influential, but they were definitely in the mix. The Qumran community is probably just a subsection of the broader Essene movement, though. Quackshot asked, for how the ancient world viewed homosexuality, do you have any recommended books on the subject? If you give me just 1 second, I will pull up the reading the bibliography, the one-page bibliography I used for the online class that I taught on homosexuality and the Bible. Give me just one moment. And that class, by the way, is still available at McClellan.org. Spelled the way my username is spelled, MAKLELAN. Okay, I will go ahead and share the screen so you can see. So that should be pretty, yeah, you should be able to read that okay. So if you're interested in looking at those, go ahead and take a screenshot of that or something. Also, if you go to danielomcclellan.com, that's just kind of there's not really much there right now, but I do have a page of resources. All of my bibliographies for all the online classes I've done are on that page. So you can go there, you can find that. You can even find a recommended reading list that was very helpfully and generously put together by an individual on my Patreon. It goes by Hayden Tank. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down, but you can find that on the website I just mentioned if you are interested in that. All right, I think I've hard work. Thank you so much for the question. Will you consider making content on Nina E. Livesey, the letters of Paul in their Roman literary context, reassessing apostolic authorship? Let me take a look at that. I'm not aware of that. There we go. Is this from? Oh, brand new. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely consider making content on that. I'll have to get a copy of the book, check it out, and maybe see if I can't get in touch with the author about joining us on our podcast to talk about it, if it is interesting enough. But thank you for making me aware of that book. I was not aware of it yet. Eric McRae, thank you for being here for your first time. I appreciate the kind words, and I will try to keep up the great work. Some guy says, I'm considering growing a beard. Do you recommend it, or is it easier to just do a daily shave? I hate shaving. So for me, this is much easier. The first month or so, it can be itchy. It can be a pain. But once you get through that, it's fine. Dressen says, Dan, a question about methodology. Do you think it is possible to demonstrate that a supernatural explanation is the most probable? I mean, philosophically, sure, it's possible. No one's ever successfully made the case that it's plausible, and I just don't see a way that it could be. However, at the same time, one of the nature of the supernatural is that it's not really reconcilable with the data, and as such, you may be able to make a case that something is possible or plausible, but you wouldn't be able to falsify any cases. And so from a methodological point of view, you would have to accept any explanations if you would have to accept all explanations if you accept any explanations. So I just don't, I think it's a non-starter methodologically speaking. We need to know today's fit. I've got a weight belt with an ice pack wrapped around me because I've been laid up for the last week with a back injury, but I got my D&D shirt on. Unfortunately, this weight belt has Velcro on it that sticks to the little lumbar support thing in my chair. Renee Madden says, hi, Dan, can you comment on the differences in the Greek between different biblical authors? Modern translations make it so that they feel a similar, contributing to a doctrine of univocality. Yeah, there is, the Greek is of different quality. You have some that's a little more philosophically oriented, particularly with like the Logos hymn in John 1. Luke is a good user of Greek. Mark is, as well. Revelation author is terrible with their Greek. There's a David Bentley Hart did a translation of the New Testament like 6 years ago. And one of the goals of this translation was to try to reproduce for the English reader the experience of the Greek reader. So if the Greek was really flowery prose and really technically sophisticated, he tried to render the English that way. Whereas if the Greek was very basic, he tried to render the English that way. If it was problematic Greek, like Revelation, for instance, he tried to render the English that way. So David Bentley Hart's translation of the New Testament is probably the closest you'll get to a reproduction of the experience of the original Greek hearer or reader of the text. And I wouldn't recommend that translation for someone who's just trying to best understand the New Testament. I mean, if you want that experience, that's the best I think that is available right now for that experience, but it is a bit idiosyncratic. Do we know why Shaddai was translated as something akin to omnipotent in the LXX, if I've understood things correctly? There have probably been theories about that. I'm not sure that I'm aware of any. My initial assumption would be that that was a traditional reading that developed, and so the Septuagint translators were just rendering it according to how they understood it. But I'd have to look that up to see if there's an actual argument made somewhere. But yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Actually, give me 1 second. So Ted Lewis's book, The Origin and Character of God, clocks in at over 1,000 pages. But he has a good lengthy discussion of El Shaddai, and I'm just going to check and see what he if he says anything about the Greek translation. My assumption is that he won't. El Shaddai, there we go. Okay. So he asks, what is the ancient etymology of Shaddai, and how does this square with the translations of the Septuagint, Pantocrator, and Vulgate, omnipotent, which elevate the deity to preeminent status? So he's asking the question at the beginning of the sections, which leads me to believe he's at least going to posit some kind of theory. Says readers are the numerous and lengthy etymological discussions, which include debates about the inconsistent use of sibilants in the various cognate languages, cannot detain us here. Readers are directed to the many treatments of this topic. He does talk about a few. Yeah, it looks like he doesn't really address the Almighty question directly. Okay, so let me see. 122. El Worship is chapter 4, 122. Let me just see if there's a publication that might do it. And I'm sorry to be taking up so much time with this one question. Chapter 4, note 122 takes us to. Ooh, yeah. A lot of stuff, 35, 1961, 1984, a lot of older stuff. I'll have to make a video about that because I don't want to go digging through the bibliography any further. I hope that was somewhat helpful. Simone Batio, hi. Hi, Dan. Hello, Simone. I'm still digging into that stuff about the Damascus document, but looking at legal literature more broadly, do you have any recommendations for the development of law in the Second Temple period, or about law in the New Testament? I've read most of the Aharon Shemesh book, Halakha, but I'm looking for more that includes early Christian lit and maybe diaspora stuff. Most of the legal stuff that I have looked at has been earlier than that. But let me just take a look. The stuff that's later looks like it's like just papers. So like Conrad Schmid has, where'd it go? Conrad Schmid has a paper called Divine Legislation in the Pentateuch in its late Judean and Neo-Babylonian context, which is in a more Zebek volume from 2016 called The Fall of Jerusalem and the Rise of the Torah. That actually, that volume might have some other stuff in it. The law, Neely Wasana has a paper in there called The Law of the King, Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20, in the light of empire and destruction. That might have a little bit of stuff in there. I assume you've already looked at Levinson's Legal Revision and Religious Renewal in Ancient Israel, and then the Deuteronomy and the Hermeneutics of Legal Innovation. I think that's mostly focused on before the Second Temple period, but it's been a while since I've looked at it. Yeah, but I don't know that I have looked. Legal economic rise of him. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm aware, or it doesn't look like I have much stuff that's directly on that time period. That's probably just because I haven't looked, and not because there is a dearth of material on that. I'm sure people have written on that, but I'll have to In fact, I'm going to take a note because that does sound like a fascinating question. And all right. And I'll make sure I have a better answer for you next time around. Okay, Tony B., thank you for the question. Jeremiah 8:8 talks about the lying or false pen of scribes impacting the Tanakh, but the KJV uses vain. Can you comment on the translation and how people claiming inerrancy process this? Let me take a look at is it Sheker? Yeah. In vain made he it. The pen of the scribes is in vain. It uses sheker twice. Le sheker, or la sheker, excuse me. Asa et sheker sofrim. That is a curious one when it comes to the King James Version's rendering. It's probably in an effort to try to achieve some kind of parallelism, since the word is used twice. But breach of faith, lie, a lie. I'm looking in Hallowed. Yeah, it seems to me lie. Here's one entry: to make someone trust in a lie, an empty falsehood. Yeah, I'm not sure why the King James Version is going with that, but you'll find most folks, when they talk about inerrancy, at least the more thoughtful ones who want to promote some idea of inerrancy, will talk about how we can only really assert inerrancy for the autographs. They'll say it was the authors who were inspired and not the scribes. So there are ways that people dance around this issue because all we have is from scribes. It's through numerous layers of scribes, and so how can you claim to have confidence and inerrant text if there are lying scribes all over the place? So I think that's how they want to eat their cake and have it too, and so they'll just insist that we can, then they'll retreat to text critical arguments. Oh, it's 99% pure. We have the text, 99% accurate, and the 1% is just spelling errors and don't mean anything, and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of different ways to rationalize away the data regarding inerrancy. Someone about you. Yeah, I've looked at those. I'm mostly looking for later stuff. I thought you might know some good stuff on the law and the NT particularly. I should probably just look up stuff by Paul T. Sloan and other people looking at that right now. Probably, because I'm drawing a blank at the moment when it comes to the law in New Testament. Let me think. Foreign law, special laws, retelling the law. Is there Jewish law? That sounds like Boyarin. Yeah, most of what I'm seeing is unrelated to the New Testament. Biblical natural law. A theocentric and theological approach. I'm going to have to keep that book open. Jewish law from Jesus to the Mishnah. We got E.P. Sanders' book, Jewish Law from Jesus to the Mishnah. 5 studies. This is from 2016. So we've got the Synoptic Jesus and the Law. Did the Pharisees have oral law? Did the Pharisees eat ordinary food in purity? Purity food and offerings in the Greek-speaking diaspora. Jacob Neusner and the Philosophy of the Mishnah. If you're not already aware of that one, that might be something to check out. All right, Archival Bob, thank you so much for the question. Consider this a thank you for going on a small book hunt over my question. Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. And I live for little book hunts. I just don't want to waste everybody's time is the only thing. JC, thank you so much for the question. Tsabaru, to twinkle, blink, mutter. Star of eye, blink, wink maliciously, of demon bird, twitter, chirp, of snake, rustle, or hiss, speak. Shin, cause to spread news. Okay, tsiprum. Okay, beak of bird. Appointed ornament in stone, metal. All right. And Jiromide, thank you for the question. You can't hide your lion scribes. Neither can the eagles. I love the Big Lebowski, but I also love the Eagles. And so whenever I hear an Eagles song, I always think of the Big Lebowski, and it kind of frustrates me. Why can't the Big Lebowski appreciate the Eagles as much as I? Boyarin, I love him, but only when he's talking about things after around 400 CE and not saying Targum Neophytes early TT. That argument is above my pay grade. Jimmy Thompson, thank you so much for the question. Hi, Dan. Are there certain books of the Bible that should have been left out while others should have been added into the canon, i.e. the Shepherd of Hermas comes up quite a bit to replace Revelation? I mean, should have been left out or added in. That's a value judgment that I'm not going to make. But there are a number of books that were kind of inside and then got kicked out, or outside and got brought in. The Ben Sira is one that was... there's some early rabbinic discussion of that being authoritative. That was considered authoritative for some early Jewish writers for a while, and that ultimately got left out. You got the Shepherd of Hermas, and then you have the Barnabas, the Epistle of Barnabas, which was also considered authoritative for a while. Enoch was considered authentic and authoritative within Judaism and Christianity for a bit, before finally, probably in the early to mid 4th century CE, getting definitively pushed out. Things like Esther were on the cusp, almost didn't make it. Song of Songs was... We don't have the... I don't think we have an argument against the Song of Songs, but we have a bunch of arguments strenuously for the Song of Songs, suggesting that there were people who were questioning whether or not the Song of Songs defiled the hands. So there are a bunch of texts that were kind of on the cusp and either got shoved out or got drawn in. And I'm trying to think of... if you... Lee Martin McDonald is a scholar who's probably done the most on the biblical canon, and his 2-volume formation of the biblical canon, I think that's what it's called, is expensive but really, really good. He discusses all of that at great length. So I would highly recommend that if you're interested in those questions. JC, could this be why the coffers of triumphal arcs display the 6-petaled crocus rosette? Is it a representation of the heavens rolling up like a seeper? That's an interesting question. I don't think I have a strong opinion on that. It sounds a little too... you are talking about the... display the 6-petal crocus. Oh, yeah. It would surprise me. I think that has just become... because you see it as well on like the altar at Magdala, the rosette, and it appears... I want to say you see it as well in some of the carvings at Capernaum. I think I recall seeing the rosette there as well. That seems pretty figurative, pretty symbolic. My understanding is that most scholars think that imagery is not quite so pregnant with apocalyptic significance. So that would surprise me. That's an interesting thought. I'll have to look more into that, but I think it would surprise me if that were the origin of the popularity of that symbol. But thank you for the question and for following up. I wasn't sure if we'd gotten what you were getting at. But if you know of any scholars who address that, I'd be interested to go track them down. Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much for the question. Why were some books in the Old Testament written in poetry? That was one of the main literary genres anciently. In fact, the oldest parts of the Hebrew Bible are poetry. They're fragments of poems that are worked into longer poems, but there was poetry before there was historical prose and historical narrative. So that pre-exists the historical narrative and was always a very popular. Somebody rang the doorbell. I think I have children nearby. Yes, who will answer it. Okay. So yeah, poetry was one of the more popular. You got it? Poetry was one of the more popular genres of the time period. Thank you for another question, JC. If Ugaritic Harshan is from Hersag and it's the mountain abode of El, and Hersag is a homograph of Azubir, the ediment of Saffron is El's abode, Saffron. If all those things are true, that seems like a plausible connection. But I don't know that all of those things are accurate. But it sounds like you're looking deeper into these etymological links than I have recently. So I can't speak authoritatively to the legitimacy of those connections. But doesn't sound entirely unreasonable if those etymological links are correct. But thank you for the question. And let's see if I'm gonna get back to the. GA5524 says, what's your take on the anti-Catholic Church conspiracy theories? That they are consistently asinine and just rooted in anti-Catholic prejudice. I mean, there are legitimate reasons to be critical of different layers of the Catholic Church as an institution, but yeah, the conspiracy theories are idiotic. Is there any justification to devotionally approach the Bible with the concept of harmonizing passages / thinking of God as the author that doesn't have to do with authoritarianism? Absolutely. There are lots of folks who approach it trying to use it as a way to better themselves, better their relationships with their family, with their community. Geopolitically, there are all kinds of different ways to approach harmonizing the biblical text that don't have to do with authoritarianism. But once you get an organization together and an institution, institutional concerns are usually going to take over for the people who are in charge of the institution, and then it's going to come down to authoritarianism. And the reason is because the more authoritarianism makes for clearer and stronger boundaries, and institutions generally prefer clearer and stronger boundaries. And if they neglect those institutional concerns, then boundaries get porous and squishy and fuzzy, and that usually has detrimental effects for them. Jacob Mayberry, thank you so much for the question. Thoughts on the scholarship of Hugh Nibbley? Incredibly wide-read, can see connections across time and space, but also sees connections across time and space that probably shouldn't be seen. So a bit of a parallelomaniac. So I'm not a huge fan of Nibbley, and yeah, when I did my undergrad at BYU, my first Ancient Near Eastern Studies class was with oh my gosh, I can't believe I've forgotten his name, but somebody who was not a huge fan of Nibbley's work, and I initially was annoyed by that, but now I've come around on that. Quackshot says, Dan, can you talk about your part of the Bible for Normal People's Children's Bible? I skipped Hayden. I'm sorry. I didn't see that question right above it. I wrote the segment on Jeroboam and Rehoboam and the dividing of the mythical United Kingdom. So I tried to be as clear as I could about what was going on while staying within the word count, and tried to make the story, tried to faithfully represent the story, while also acknowledging it's a story, and trying to bring to the surface the rhetorical goals of the author without using something so, without using terms like rhetorical goals to confuse children. Hayden Tank, after your book, parenthesis S, parenthesis, and your work on monotheism, what is the next topic you're aiming to dive into for research and scholarship? Christology, early Christology. It's all kind of interrelated, but I've got a book idea that and I've already got a publisher who would love to see the proposal that will talk about my framework for thinking the logic of divine images, how that probably informs the developments of the notion of Jesus as God within early Christianity. Philip Marcion North says, hi, Dan, hope you're well. Since it's recently become a topic of almost neuralgic intensity in some quarters, I was wondering what the Bible has to say, if anything at all, about the morality of contraception. Nothing. In the ancient world, the fertility was always a concern. The infant mortality was always a concern. So like the more kids you had, the better. There's not really, but the notion that anyone would criticize or prohibit or condemn contraception, I think would sound kind of silly. The closest anybody comes to the argument for some kind of anti-contraception in the Bible would be the story of Onan, which has absolutely nothing to do with contraception. It's entirely about how his spilling his seed was negligence regarding his duties to his levirate marriage. So it had nothing to do with wasting semen, because if wasting semen were such a huge problem, Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Exodus would have laws prohibiting masturbation, and they don't. So the Onan story is entirely about his refusal to honor the Levirate duties. From the Comprehensive Aramaic Lexicon, Carcos, Archway, Palmarine. On the left, as you enter the quarter behind the great tympanum, see the Golden Gate. I'll have to look that up. Give me a second. Okay, I will look that up and see. Thank you for the question, JC. And just in case anybody didn't see that. And then Mario Molina, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dan, love your podcast. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'm on my journey in following Christ and have come upon the topic of inerrancy of the Bible, example, Word of God. What resources do you recommend to grow my understanding? Well, it depends on which direction you want to grow your understanding in. There is a book that Pete Enns contributed to that is called, let me just pull it up here. It's called 5 Views on Biblical Inerrancy. And there are 5 contributors: Albert Mohler, Pete Enns, Michael Bird, Kevin Van Hooser, and John Franke. And they basically each share their position on inerrancy. And I would side the most with Pete, but I think Mike Bird does a decent job of defending his position as well. But that is, I think that's is that by Erdman's? Sorry, my Adobe Acrobat Pro is being a jerk. Okay, there we go. This is by Zondervan, Zondervan, from 2013. I think that's one thing you can look at to find different perspectives and see which ones resonate with you. And I thought I saw, let's see, 2010. Yeah, I think that's probably the way that I'd go. I have some other papers, but they're pretty technical, and I don't think they would be incredibly helpful. But yeah, that book will probably give you plenty to think about, and also some other resources that you can look at. Philip follows up. Thanks. I'd never heard anyone actually cite a specific verse when inveighing against contraception or birth control, so I assumed it was just chest thumping misogyny. You can usually assume that's what it is for that kind of stuff. Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much for the question. Is it a conspiracy theory? There are books and relics in the Vatican that is kept hidden from the public. A lot of people evidence think that. I think there are absolutely things that the Vatican would rather keep confidential, but in my experience and the experience of friends of mine who do research with the Vatican, they tend to be pretty forthcoming. For the most part, when things kind of pop up, they just didn't know they had it. They have a ton of stuff, and they don't keep, I don't think they are very consistent on their inventory. So sometimes things just pop up. But I have no doubt at the same time that there are some things that they just would rather not the public know about. But like huge conspiratorial things, I tend to think that those kind of administrative decisions are frequently quite boring. And so, yeah, the conspiracy theories about aliens, about, books that were taken out of the Bible or secret books, all that kind of stuff, I think those are usually nonsense. But thank you for your question. Zeke, thank you so much. He came to me. Chesed is the answer. He is love. Well, thank you for the comment. Dr. Clark Van Glider, excuse me. Thank you. There was a claim that arsenokites post-Paul was almost exclusively used to describe sexual exploitation for money, and at most occurred in lists. TLG cites 149. Have you looked into that also? 149 occurrences of arsenokites. So most occurred in lists. Like the two occurrences in the New Testament are within vice lists. So like that's the first association with any kind of lists. Sexual exploitation for money, I don't see that as a salient context in 1 Corinthians 6 or in 1 Timothy. If it became used that way in later periods, I think that's probably not what Paul had in mind, but I imagine the majority of those 149 occurrences from the thesaurus are probably people quoting or referring to Paul. But I haven't looked into the argument that that this is about sexual exploitation for money in Paul. But I'll take a closer look at that. Thank you for the comment. Here to learn. Thank you so much. Was John actually Elijah reincarnated? No. Is there any argument to be made for reincarnation based on the texts? I don't think the way we think of reincarnation was something that was salient for the authors of the New Testament. Elijah became kind of a symbol for the coming Messiah. So John, and that's why like John the Baptist is kind of, is this Elijah? And also Jesus on the cross calling out Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Maybe he's calling for Elijah. There's a messianic kind of expectation related to Elijah's return in the New Testament. And even today, leaving a chair empty for Elijah. So anytime somebody shows up who claims to have some kind of special mission, there's going to be some resonance with this. Oh, is this the one who is to come? In fact, that is actually a book you might check out. And that is by Fitzmyer from 2007. Joseph Fitzmyer, The One Who Is to Come, which is all about the messianic expectations of the time. Yeah, I'd recommend that book for a really good discussion about the topic. And then my friend David Burnett says he's working on a book, or he has a book idea on Elijah as the one who is to come. And I imagine there'll be discussions about John the Baptist. And James McGrath's new book, Christ Maker, A Life of John the Baptist, talks quite a bit about the notion that John was Elijah as well. Okay, let me get back on track. Jacob Mayberry, thank you for the question. Thoughts on John Walton's Lost World series? I think they do a good job of bringing a lot of data to the discussion. I don't know that I would agree with all of John's syntheses, but certainly something worth reading. If you're interested in Garden of Eden, if you're interested in creation in Genesis 1 and things like that, they're very, very good discussions. But thank you for the question. Zeke, thank you so much for the question. He left me this mission of tell people he is looking for a commitment with you. That's all. I don't know what to do. He said that all he wants Israel to stop the ball thing. Until that happens, he is not coming. Well, I don't know what the ball thing is. I am a practicing Christian already, so I appreciate your concern and I appreciate the comments. But I don't know that I can help you much beyond that. I don't think there's much ball stuff going on in Israel and Palestine right now, and it hasn't been for an awfully long time. But thank you for the question. Mick Evans, thank you so much. I love your content, although it can have a fairly pessimistic tone at times. Sometimes I am in a pessimistic mood. Do you have any resources or hermeneutics on finding value and reconstruction coming from a more postmodern perspective? There's a lot that... hang on just a second. Most discussions of deconstruction these days are at least going to be influenced by postmodernism, and so are going to engage with kind of postmodern concerns. If you're looking for something technical, there are all kinds of different discussions about that. But there's a book that's going to be coming out shortly. That's called Deconstructing. And it is by Rev Carla, the TikTok account, and that is Carla Kamstra, Deconstructing, Leaving Church, Finding Faith, which is going to talk about deconstructing and then reconstructing faith. And the approach is going to be informed by a pretty postmodern worldview. So if you're looking for something on that, I think that might help. Folks like Pete Enns write valuable books on deconstruction and reconstruction and how to engage with a critical approach to the text without necessarily losing faith. So, and there, Hayden Tank says, Pete Enns' podcast and his book, How the Bible Actually Works, are both great for folks looking for something more affirming, and also for the other person looking for accessible discussions about inerrancy's problems. Okay, so that was about the inerrancy question, but I think Pete Enns also has good stuff to say about affirming and postmodernism. His newer one, which I think came out late last year, is called Curveball, which is about what to do when, I forget exactly what it is, your faith throws you a curveball or something like that. But there's stuff out there that I imagine would answer some of those questions for you. Thank you for the question. Quackshot, are you working on expanding the theory about Adonai worship deriving from ancestor worship? I hope to. Another book that I'm going to be working on, probably my next trade book, will be a book on how God changes throughout the Bible, from the earliest literary layers in the Bible to the latest literary layers in the Bible. And I'm going to talk about how there are parts of the Bible where Adonai seems to look more like an ancestor deity than a national deity. And so I'll talk about some of the theories about that, but I don't know how deep I will get into stuff. Steve Acosta, welcome. Thank you so much for the question. My brother was in a Christian rock band called Eternal Sound, but it only lasted a couple of years. So it was a bit of a misnomer, I guess. I didn't know anything at all about Christian rock growing up. I remember I was in high school, I had a couple of friends who were into Jars of Clay. Is that around that time period, the 90s? But I never could get into it very much. But thank you so much, Steve, for dropping in and saying hi. Tony B, thank you for the question. Can you comment on the similarities and differences of the Judges 19 to 21 story of Benjamites and the Levite traveler versus the story of Sodom, especially establishing dominance over Levite traveler and dismemberment of concubine? Yeah, the stories are clearly interdependent. both are about somebody from the outside coming to spend the night, and there is somebody who shows them hospitality, invites them in, and then the men of the city come to threaten the visitor with sexual assault. And this, as with sexual assault today, it's about power, not about attraction or lust or anything like that. And the idea is, you're an outsider, we are going to humiliate, demean, belittle, and feminize you. And this was a violation of the socially conventionalized hierarchy of domination and penetration. And so it is the very height of inhospitality. It is inhospitality to the nth degree. And in both instances, there is a request that they take the women instead. In Judges 19, it is the man's daughter and then the visitor's concubine. And the man's daughter doesn't get shoved outside, but the man's concubine does. And she is abused throughout the night and ultimately, well, the text actually isn't clear if she passes away from her injuries or if the man's dismemberment of her is what causes her death. The text is not clear about that. In the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, one of the reasons that I think Genesis 19 is probably the later telling of the story, he offers the two daughters, and this is a way to show, hospitality to guests who are foreigners is so important to me that I'm willing to give up members of my own family and their monetary value from the bride price when they get married and things like that. So it's a way to escalate Lot and this one guy's kindness to the stranger. Now, Genesis 19 needs those two daughters for the later etiology for the Moabites and is it the Edomites or the Ammonites? Ammonites. Okay, so and that is rhetoric against the Moabites and the Ammonites. They are born of incest. That's a way to thumb the nose at the Moabites and the Ammonites. So they need the two daughters for the rest of the story. So they can't shove the two daughters out into the street. And so the point is clearly that they are going to do this horrific injustice to these visitors. And in both instances, in one instance, the man uses this as a demonstration of just how horrific things have gotten in Israel because there's no king in the land. And then the other instance, it is used as the excuse for destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. But there's absolutely no indication this was about homosexual lust or anything like that. And also, when you think about it, the angels are going down to see if their wickedness is as bad as the outcry that has come up. And if all of the men of the city are participating in this same-sex intercourse, who is crying out? There's no victim, really. And so there's not really anyone to be crying out for God to go check in on. Simone, hi Dan, have you looked at Genesis 31:13 regarding the ancestor thing? I find that verse very fascinating. Let me pull it up real quick. I'm sure I've looked at it. I don't know that I've considered. I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and return to the land of your birth. I find this verse very fascinating as people assume a textual corruption and read it as God of Beit El, but there's no grammatical problem. The only problem is that it says God, Beit El, so an apposition. And then following that, we get swearing upon the fear of Isaac and so on. I'm very interested in that. We'll look forward to that book. Yeah, because it's Anochi Ha'el Beit El. And you cannot have the definite article on the nomen regens of a construct phrase. And I think I wrote about that. I bet you I wrote about that in my book because it is in my dissertation. I know that for a fact, but let me see if I just mention it. I bet I briefly mention it. Maybe I don't. But yeah, I think that is interesting. And Beit El would go on to become the name of, that's like a divine image is a Beit-El, a house of God, because it houses the agency of the deity. I thought I talked about it in my book. I guess it's just in my dissertation. But yeah, that's going to inform my take on the ancestral deity thing. And then Daniel Fleming's book, Adonai Before Israel, Glimpses of History and a Divine Name, also kind of winks at this idea, ancestral deity, and I think makes a good argument against the objection that is always brought up, which is that ancestral deities don't become patron deities. And I think he makes a good case against that. Mike Reiterson, thank you so much for the question. What do you think about the aliens and UFOs? Not much. I think the overwhelmingly, if not unilaterally, these are things that people imagine or make up or hallucinate or misinterpret. I don't think that I've ever seen any actual evidence of alien life, although I am not opposed to the idea. I think it would be awesome if we could discover some kind of alien life. I don't think it's impossible. I think there's probably some kind of life somewhere out there, but I don't think that it's ever visited us or probed any of us. And as the great poet once said, we've reached the limits of what we can learn from probing humans. Celio Jr., thank you so much for the question. Hi, Dan. I am from Brazil and a big fan of work. Thank you so much. Here we are seeing a great increase of Protestant churches based on dogma, but little knowledge about the book. Slavery, for example, is not mentioned. Among the Protestants, are you saying they don't acknowledge that slavery is in the Bible? I have been to Brazil. I've actually visited a Pentecostal church in Brazil, and I've seen some of the things that go on in smaller villages. Fascinating stuff. I know there's a movement that I was warned about from Brazil when I was down there. I do not remember what the movement was called, though. But thank you for the comment, and I'd be interested to hear a follow-up if you didn't get to finish your thought, or if I've misunderstood you. Kaluza Klein, what is your take on Mauro Bellino? Thank you. So this is the Italian translator that doesn't really have relevant expertise and suggests that Elohim is always plural, which is just nonsense. You can just look throughout the text and see Elohim can be used with plural verbs and pronouns, or with singular verbs and pronouns. And that's what determines whether it's being used in the singular or in the plural. Joel Burnett wrote a wonderful book called A Reassessment of Biblical Elohim, which discusses how Elohim can be grammatically plural, but be used with singular reference. And it's not the only word that does that. There are other words that can do that. So I doesn't know what he's talking about, at least when it comes to his reconstruction of early Yahwism of the words for deity and that kind of stuff. As far as his linguistic chops, apart from those arguments, I don't know. MJR Schneider, thank you so much for the question. I've read a lot about how the anthropocentrism of the Bible and how this has led to environmental exploitation, but how true is this? What is the dominant view of animals and the environment in the Bible? That's actually a discussion that's going on more and more these days. In fact, an award-winning book that just came out a little bit ago. There are two issues that I see popping up more and more is the family or childhood in ancient Israel and animals in ancient Israel. And I don't remember the name of the book. David Carr, I had him on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we asked him what he's working on now, and he mentioned is working on, if I recall correctly, animals and ethics in the Bible. There's not a real, like, you have different interpretations once you get into Greco-Roman period Judaism and the New Testament. And so there is a movement towards like vegetarianism to some degree. You see that a little bit in Daniel, but the book of Genesis supports the use of animals for food. And I think the exploitation of the environment and flora and fauna would be a violation of even the way the Bible represents humanity's dominion over these things. I think there's a stewardship that it goes along with it that is violated through exploitation. Matthew Tracy, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Zeke, thank you for the question. I'm having trouble handling my divine science gifts. The visions are daily now. Any advice in that? We keep doing it wrong. He said, I'm getting a call. I don't know if you're getting a call. And I don't know about your divine science gifts. I'm a critical scholar here, so I am always happy to field any comments or questions, but I don't have any counsel that I can offer you when it comes to the supernatural directly. Celio Jr., thank you so much. Again, so it seems like this is the same question again, Celio. I appreciate your participation. If anybody can, I don't know if he's on the, Celio is on the regular chat, but oh, hi, Backyard Professor. Hope you're doing all right. But I'd like to be able to respond to Celio's concerns, but I don't know exactly what they are, and I would hate for him to continue to repeat the same question over and over again at such a high cost. Doodle, thank you so much. For some people, God is a corporeal / anthropomorphic being. To others, God is more abstract, ultimate reality, the absolute, etc. Was there ancient people who held this latter view? Not really until we get to Greco-Roman period Judaism. It's really the influx of Greek philosophy that we get this kind of reconceptualization of deity in those terms of incorporeality and even immateriality, which is even later than that. Because for the early Greek philosophers, divine was spirit, but spirit was a type of matter. But for the most part, it is all thoroughly, if not anthropomorphic, at least corporeal. The deity has a body that is, and so for instance, in, I think it's Isaiah 31, where they talk about the Egyptians their horses are flesh and not spirit. The idea is not matter versus immaterial. The idea is corruptible flesh versus invulnerable spirit. Like you can't hurt wind. You can't break the leg of wind. Wind is incorruptible. It is invulnerable. So spirit is kind of compared to that. Hayden Tank points out that David Carr is also doing an Ask Me Anything on Reddit Academic Biblical next Thursday. So if somebody wants to ask him about animals and ecology in his upcoming work, that would be very cool. Jacob is asking, the chat just got here. Is he taking cues from this channel today? Because sometimes I am forgetful and I don't remember the whatever this thing is called. See, there's the Discord. I don't remember my Discord. Jacob, I'm here. Who were your advisors for your Oxford thesis? So it started off, Alison Salveson was assigned to my thesis, but less than halfway through, she had too many PhD students and other things going on. They reassigned me to Timothy Michael Law, who was a wonderful scholar who wrote a wonderful book called When God Spoke Greek, which is all about the role of the Septuagint in early Christianity. And my Oxford thesis was on the Septuagint. Oh, and just if anybody is interested in anthropomorphism and how it developed and changed, let me pull up some stuff for you. Well, the first thing I would recommend is Francesca Stavrakopoulou's wonderful God and Anatomy, which is a phenomenal discussion of God's body. But there are a bunch of books that have been written on this recently. In fact, and it'll take too long to pull them up. I'll just rattle them off. Wagner's book. Now I forget the title of Wagner's book. Christoph Markschies has a book called God's Body. Benjamin Sommer has one called The Bodies of God in the World of Ancient Israel. Esther Hamori, When Gods Were Men, Anthropomorphism in the Bible in the Ancient Near East. Wagner's book, I think, is called, okay, that one I have to look up. God's Body, the Anthropomorphic God in the Old Testament. Yeah, those are some really good discussions on anthropomorphism. And then within Judaism, there's a wonderful paper by Shama Friedman called Anthropomorphism and Its Eradication, which is about the end of anthropomorphism in medieval Jewish philosophy, specifically at the hands of Maimonides. Rev JC, thank you so much for the question. Thoughts on cannabis as cannabis? Context references, Jeremiah 6:20, Isaiah. I made a video about this recently. So kane bosum is a compound phrase, kane, which is a reference to any one of a variety of different types of reeds or grasses or sticks. And bosum, which can be a reference to balsam. It can be a reference to balsam oil. It can be a reference to fragrant oils. So you only have one occurrence of the two of these together, kane bosum, which is in Exodus 30, verse, I thought it was 13, but is it 23? Yes, actually, that's right. Exodus 30, 23. The other passages either have kane bosum or kane tov or something else, or kane all by themselves. And there's an argument that all of these are references to cannabis. I don't think the argument has much weight to it. Etymologically, when you go look at the cognates that are asserted, I think they are rather arbitrarily asserted. For instance, the notion that the Hebrew kane is cognate with Akkadian kunabu just entirely ignores the overwhelming evidence that it is etymologically cognate with kanu in Akkadian. But kunabu is related to cannabis. And I think the much more likely etymological route is from like Scythian and languages like that into Greek and then into Mishnaic Hebrew, because there are some rabbinic Hebrew texts that use kanbos. And so the argument is kane bosum turned into kanbos, but the consensus view is that these other words came into Greek as cannabis or cannabos, and then went from Greek into Rabbinic Hebrew as kanbos. I think that is an easier etymological route. I think it makes more sense of the data, and it doesn't require we leapfrog over these pretty strong consensuses regarding cognates between Hebrew and languages like Akkadian. So thank you for the question. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying I don't think that the argument outweighs the weight of the data against it. Doug Vincent, and as I've also, sorry, I'll just take this in for a second. As I've also repeatedly pointed out, we know for a fact they were using cannabis in temple worship. We have discovered cannabis in the incense remains that were burnt on one of the incense altars that was discovered at the Judahite temple at Arad. So whether or not they used it is not up for debate. They did. I'm just saying I don't think the argument is strong that this phrase in the Hebrew Bible is a reference to cannabis. Doug Vincent, thank you so much. Is there evidence in the Bible that God's love is unconditional? We don't really see that explicitly indicated anymore anywhere. You do see statements about long suffering and God is patient and that kind of stuff. Long of nose, but yeah, the unconditional, I think that's a later interpretation. Order verses in John prove it as conditional. You get a mix. It's not consistent. I don't think John promotes unconditional love. I think pretty much everybody promotes the notion that you can get on God's bad side. But there is also an argument to make that Paul is a universalist. And we have within early Christianity the apokatastasis, which is promoted by Origen, by Eusebius, by others. And so universalism is something that I think there's a good case to make that that was one of the main positions within early Christianity. But unconditional love, I don't think is in the Bible. Hey, Dan, hope all is well. All is well except for my back, which I'm trying to heal up right now. Favorite monster and or creature in the Bible? Resheph and similar demythologized characters are fair game. I really like Leviathan just because of how frequently they pop up. And I've also made the argument that Leviathan is the dragon in Revelation. It's not the serpent from the Garden of Eden. I've made that argument several times, but yeah, there's just so much cool stuff in Leviathan. And if you want a really cool discussion of the battle between the sea and Leviathan and God, there is a book that came out in 2020 by Noga Iyali Darshan called The Storm God and the Sea. And I think this is a wonderful, it's very technical, but this is a wonderful discussion of all the traditions regarding Leviathan and other sea creatures as symbolic of the chaotic waters of creation and stuff like that from a bunch of different societies, including the Bible. So if you want a real good, broad survey of all of the storm god battling with the sea traditions, this is, I think, the book for you. But again, it is rather technical. Roden says, "Hi Dan, I've been wondering where you stand on the Q versus Farr hypothesis debate. My old Oxford NT tutor Eric Eve is very much a Farr proponent, but where do you think the data stands?" I kind of would say, if I'm not suspending judgment, I may be leaning a little in the direction of Farr. Some of the people that I know whose opinions I really, really respect and value are leaning away from Q. So if I'm going to lean on anybody, it's going to be those folks. So yeah, I would say I lean away from Q, but I don't know enough about the debate to say here are all the reasons why. Tony B, thank you so much for the question. Luke 22:35-36 says, Jesus telling apostles to arm themselves with swords, but Peter uses it later and Jesus rebukes and heals Malchus's ear. How do apologists justify verse Sermon on the Mount, turn other cheek? So there are two different interpretations of what's going on in Luke 22 that I'm familiar with. And I think what's more likely is how the story plays out. Because the reason Jesus says this is because he's supposed to be numbered with the criminals or the transgressors or something like that. And so he's discovered with men who are illegally carrying weapons. And so in one sense, it can be understood as a kind of prophetic, hey, by the way, we need to have swords with us so that when I get caught, I can be among the criminals. And one of them responds, we have two swords right here. And he says, it is enough. And so one interpretation is that this was just a prophetic, this was just Jesus ensuring that this thing prophetically took place. Namely, himself being caught with people who were strapped illegally. In the commentaries, you'll sometimes see scholars insist that there's a deeper meaning, that this has to do with the second coming and the warring factions, and that they would need to arm themselves. And that when they're like, well, we got two swords right here. And Jesus is kind of like, oh my gosh, forget about it. That's an interpretation that you will see sometimes in the commentaries. I tend to lean in the direction of Jesus is just showing off his prophetic chops, saying, hey, we're supposed to have weapons on us. We need some swords. And they say, we got a couple swords right here, my Lord. And he says, perfect. But I could be wrong on that. I would love to see other interpretations. Hey, Dan, another question. Has data over dogma always been your philosophy in your professional life, or is that a philosophy that developed over time? I think it's developed over the last decade. Once I got into graduate school and started looking into cognitive linguistics and the cognitive science of religion, and once I realized how much of our perception of ourselves and the world and our place within it is driven by intuitive cognition, which is driven by self-preservation and the desire to maintain or increase our standing within the social identities that are important to us, I began to realize how much dogma sits in the driver's seat. So I think since around 2012, 2013 is when I started kind of taking stock of my own positionality and how my academic perspectives and other perspectives related to politics and things like that were being influenced by my own intuitive perceptions of myself and the world around me. So I think that's it started around 2013 and has only just become more of turned into a motto within around the last 5 years or so. Salio Jr., thank you so much for following up. With regard to slavery, pastors simply ignore it. They call every type of slavery as indenture servitude, not chattel. They simply don't see how bad it is. Yes, that is something that apologists do quite a bit. They dismiss everything as either voluntary servitude or debt slavery or something like that. And that is simply false. Chattel slavery is explicitly condoned and endorsed in Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. Only it is set apart for non-Israelites. For Israelites, we have debt slavery. For non-Israelites, we have chattel slavery. And that's just explicit. There is no case to make against that. And the trade book that I have coming out early next year, which will be called The Bible Says So, I have a whole chapter on whether or not the Bible endorses slavery. And so I have a lot that my argument will be more clear and written down there. However, for people who are interested, Josh Bowen has a wonderful book called Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? That is a rather thick book. How many pages we got here? Your bibliography pages aren't numbered. Okay, so it's around 700 pages, but goes through all of the slave laws in the Bible, all the slave laws from the nations that are around Israel. Does a wonderful job of going through that discussion. So I would highly recommend that. But yeah, I agree that pastors and apologists are not willing to engage the data. They're misleading regarding that, and that's a problem. CMT 604, thank you so much. Former Jehovah's Witness here. Thoughts on the New World Translation? Very idiosyncratic. I know some folks who go to great lengths to try to defend the translation choices in there. I am not convinced by the majority of them, but I think there are instances where there are some translation choices that are provocative because they are going against kind of the conventional wisdom. And I think there is value to that. So there are some places where I think it would be worth taking a little more seriously than most folks do. But for the most part, I don't think the translation is very good. But thank you for the question. Jim Jones, thank you for the question. Hi, Dan. I started reading Higher Criticism in the 90s. What are your thoughts on the Jesus Seminar, their methodologies, and their conclusions? I think they're pretty outdated. Some of those criteria I think are valuable, but I think they got a lot more granular than the data really allows us to be. I read books by Borg, Crossan, Miller, Mack, and Funk. Crossley is one I would look up. James Crossley is writing on a historical Jesus now. They're talking about a fourth quest for the historical Jesus that's kind of in a transitionary period right now. But yeah, these days, I think most historical Jesus scholars say we need to be skeptical about the notion that we can reconstruct the actual words of Jesus to any appreciable degree. That at best, maybe we can say this has a Jesus-y vibe, but whether or not those were the actual words back translated into Aramaic, I don't think we can know for sure about that. And then Bart Ehrman wrote an interesting book called Jesus Before the Gospels, which applies social memory to try to see what we can reconstruct, where he just kind of divides it into, is this a false memory? Is this a historical memory? Is this a gist memory? And the overwhelming majority of stuff is like a gist memory. And I think that's probably representative of where the majority of scholars say we have to kind of, I totally articulated that wrong. A gist memory is about as close as we can get to confidence in identifying something that came from Jesus. Hayden Tank, future data over dogma. Guest James Crossley. I would love to have him on the show. I hung out with him a bit at the annual meeting of the SBL, Society of Biblical Literature, last November, and had a great time. But he just had a book come out. Hang on a sec. Okay, there goes the weight belt. The ice pack is no longer ice. Yeah, he had a book come out that was called Jesus and class. Jesus in class conflict. Okay, Jesus' life in class conflict, which is right at James Alec. Okay, it was co-written with Robert Miles. So that's going to talk about historical Jesus, but also through the lens of class conflict. But yeah, I'd love to chat with him on the show. I think he'd be a great guest. Matthew Tracy, thank you so much. I'm doing a sacrament meeting talk on John 1:1 and John's conception of the word. Woo-hoo. Good luck. What is a good resource to prepare? Keep up the good work. That's a difficult one. There are a lot of commentaries that talk about that. Although there's an interesting paper that was just published, I want to say 1 or 2 years ago. Let me pull it up real quick. It is in Horizons in Biblical Theology. Let me just share it real quick. Another God in the Gospel of John, a linguistic analysis of John 1:1 and 1:18 by Alexander Smerius. Very interesting discussion. I thought this was, I was so happy to see a discussion like this in a journal. Makes a lot of good points about how we interpret at least the John 1:1c, ke theos logos. So that's an interesting text if you wanted to look at that and just see kind of the variety of interpretations of that passage. That would be interesting. I thought I had. I don't have it with me. Michael Bird has a book called Jesus Among the Gods, which is also a discussion of early Christology that has a lot to say about John. And while I disagree in the end with Bird's conclusions, I think it's a phenomenal discussion and it brings so much data to the table, including about like Gnosticism and things like that, and John's philosophical outlook. So that's another thing that I would say has, I thought it was over here. So that's another thing that would have a lot to contribute. Nope, not down there. I'm sorry. It's got to be around here somewhere. Now I'm going to wonder where that book is the whole time. Okay, let me just make sure I'm caught up. Feel for how many refs to Enoch in New Testament plus impacts. Well, there's only one I think we can say for certain, which is in Jude. But in terms of impact, I mean, the notion of hell, the notions of hell are taken from Enoch. The notion of Satan is taken from Enoch. The notion of heaven is influenced by Enoch. It's phenomenally influential. And I think there are, like in Luke 10:18, where Jesus says, I saw Satan like lightning fall from heaven. Some people think that's Isaiah 14:12 and Lucifer. I don't think it is. I think that's Enochic. First Enoch 86, 1-4, where Enoch says, I looked to the heavens, I saw a star fall to the earth. And then it becomes a bull and, does the mating thing. And then a couple verses later, I saw other stars descend to the first star. And then you see this in Revelation where the dragon falls to earth and with its tail sweeps a third of the stars of heaven down to earth with it. That's totally Enochic. So there's a lot going on in there. But in terms of actual quotations, I think we're limited to Jude. Christopher Knight, thank you so much for the question. I'm sorry I'm having trouble keeping up with some of these questions. Was wondering why you use the word Adonai when referring to the Tetragrammaton. Adonai, thanks. Yeah, I have a pinned video on pretty much all my channels that I can pin videos on that discusses that. Early on in my social media content creation, I had some Jewish friends and others reach out and say, hey, would you mind not pronouncing it? And I have worked with and alongside Jewish colleagues since I started my graduate work, and it is a very cheap accommodation for me to make, so I'm happy to make it. But thank you for the question. Jacob Bennett, book Rex on Enoch's influence on the New Testament. That's a tricky question. I don't know that I can think of anything that is like directly talking about Enoch's influence on the New Testament, but almost anything on like Enoch and the Son of Man, because the Son of Man is a character in the book of Enoch, is hopefully going to. Oh, wait a minute. This might be something. Oh, this is just a paper. Okay, well, 2013, Lauren Stuckenbrook, phenomenal scholar, even better human being, wrote a paper called The Book of Enoch, Its Reception in Second Temple Jewish and in Christian Tradition. It's in a journal called Early Christianity. It might be a little difficult to get a hold of, but that's going to be a really, really good discussion. Lauren is phenomenal. So I would recommend that. I think that's the only one I can think of that like directly talks about influence in the New Testament. We also have Leslie Walk published a book back in 2011 called The Son of Man in the Parables of Enoch and in Matthew. It's going to be pretty limited on the kinds of influence that it discusses, but that will certainly discuss influence on the New Testament. Annette Yoshiko Reed's book isn't about influence on the NT, but it's great, and she does cite people who discuss that influence while aiming for a more synchronic approach. I assume you're talking, Hayden, about the fall of the angels, because she also has a book called Angels, Demons, and Writing in Early Judaism. I don't think that talks about the New Testament. Fallen Angels in the History of Judaism and Christianity is Reed's 2005 book. Yeah. I imagine that's what is being discussed. Okay, Viscount Julian, thank you so much for the question. Book Rex for atrocity literature in ANE and the Canaanites, which gives a scholarly overview which can respond to them being a uniquely evil people who practice bestiality and temple prostitution. I've come across brief discussions of that. I don't know that I've come across any monographs or any papers specifically about that. I mean, there are discussions about othering the other nations. Let me see if I can. And then Simone comments about the other question. I think there's a Matthew Thiessen book that deals with at least Jubilees in the NT and R.E. Son of Man Boyarin's Jewish Gospels and his later paper Beyond Judaisms. A couple more great recommendations. Not coming up with anything off the top of my head. Now, the recent book, David Graeber's recent book, I forget what it's called, but he discusses schismogenesis, which is not exactly what you're talking about, but that kind of reification of boundaries between people groups was one example of othering. Okay, here's something. Oh, why didn't I think of this? Rodney Sadler, Can a Cushite Change His Skin? An examination of race, ethnicity, and othering in the Hebrew Bible is one example. That I think that might be mainly about Cush. Yeah, that's going to be talking mainly about Cush. There are other discussions about Israelite identity that talk a little bit about how othering groups is a part of forging that identity. Let me just see if I can. So Nestor, Nestor, in 2010, published a book called Cognitive Perspectives on Israelite Identity, which is going to go a little bit more into cognitive sciences, but it is going to talk about othering a little bit. Yeah, a lot of books on constructing Israelite identity, cultural memory and identity in ancient societies, Jewish Christian identity. Yeah, but when it comes to specifically to demonizing others, that's something I'm afraid I can't think of anything off the top of my head that directly addresses that. But that would be something very much worth looking into. So I'm going to just take a note. And look into that. So hopefully I can give a better answer for that question next time around. But thank you so much for a question I hadn't thought of before. Exy Music, thank you so much. What is your background in cognitive linguistics? Used it in your dissertation, I believe. Much cogling mainly deals with speech over writing. Curious. So it started in my second master's thesis. I wanted to write it on when monotheism began. But I knew that the first thing I needed to figure out was what a god was. And I just was not finding anything that satisfied me. And then I looked at prototype theory and cognitive linguistics, and conceptual blend theory, frame semantics, all that kind of stuff, and was like, wow, this really has a lot of explanatory power. And from what I could tell, no one had ever turned it on the Bible to see what it said about deities. I had seen a couple of papers about it from a Syriologist discussing what prototype theory had to say about what a god was, but nothing really on the Bible. And so I started looking into that. So primarily it was like prototype theory, frame semantics, conceptual blend theory, linguistic categorization. Those were the things that I looked into, and that also led me to discover the cognitive science of religion, which I then made the main methodological approach of my doctoral dissertation. Steve JME, thank you so much. MJR Schneider, thank you so much. I have to ask, if religious belief is not factual and only serves to signal allegiance to group identities, then why would facts or moral qualms ever cause people to change their religious beliefs? They frequently don't cause people to change their religious beliefs, but sometimes they do. There's a tension between intuitive cognition and reflective cognition, and religion also provides a variety of different things to people. And it's really, I think, only been since the Reformation, since religion became focused primarily on truth propositions over and against a variety of different deliverables. But on the Data Over Dogma podcast, we had Neil Van Leeuwen, who wrote a book called Religion as Make-Believe, from the perspective of the cognitive science of religion, that talks a great deal about what value people get out of religion and why it is, as a result, why it's a credence more than a factual belief, but also why it is so perseverant. So that would be one book to go look at. But there are a bunch of books that talk about what religion contributes. Our Enoch Science book, Big Gods, talks about the history of religion and the development of civilization. And more recently, well, less recently, further back in time, but discussing religion more recently, folks like Pascal Boyer, and Ilkka Pisiainen and others have written a lot of good stuff on how religion functions the way it does. And also Harvey Whitehouse, The Ritual Animal, talks about specifically the ritual dimension and how that extends well beyond what we label religion into all segments of society, and how that functions, what it contributes. Hand of Omega, thank you so much. JSB often says meaning of Hebrew unknown, emendation yields X. How much of ancient Hebrew is lost, and how does emendation work? Emendation would be, we don't know how to make sense of this, how it stands, but if we take this letter and change it right here, then it becomes a complete sentence that we can understand. So maybe it was originally that letter. So that kind of stuff happens from time to time. But it's not so much that, well, if you think about language today, there are all kinds of nuances that can that can shade meaning in different ways and can layer meaning onto comments and linguistic expressions. And if you're not familiar with them, then you lose that meaning. And so that's primarily what's going on. Is we know what for the most part, we know what most of the words mean, but maybe it seems like some kind of idiom, and we just don't know what this idiom means. Or it could be a case where there has been some kind of corruption that has crept in, and we do need to change a letter here or change a letter there. Or it may just be some kind of poetic imagery that meant something to them anciently, and we just can't figure out what it was because nobody comments on it. But yeah, there's an awful lot of that. If you look in the Jewish Study Bible or in the JPS Tanakh, there's going to be a lot of places where the Hebrew is unclear, and they do the best that they can. Is there evidence of angel worship? There is certainly evidence of angel worship in the form of things like bowls, curses and blessings and things like that appeal to angels, offerings made to angels. Lauren Stuckenbrook, who I just mentioned a few minutes ago, has a whole book on angel veneration. In fact, I think it was his doctoral dissertation. Let me just Angel Veneration 1995, where he talks about angel veneration and Christology, a study in early Judaism and in the Christology of the Apocalypse of John. Wait a minute, is that what I was thinking? Maybe that's what I was thinking. Yeah. But there's plenty of evidence that folks were praying to angels, that folks were making votive offerings to angels and things like that. So, I would say there's some direct evidence and also a lot of circumstantial evidence. For instance, text of the Bible saying, stop worshiping angels. Mike Ryderson, thank you again for the question. Oh, shoot. Forgot about the Patreon again. Annette Yoshiko Reed is into Muay Thai. Sorry, I'm going to hold on to your question for just a second, Mike. Annette Yoshiko Reed is into Muay Thai. Yes, she could very easily beat the crap out of me. Pete Enns is a baseball Chad that he is. And Justin Sledge has magic potions and Solomonic magical spells. I'm going to be doing a live stream with Justin Sledge here in a little bit. So the question is, who's the most powerful biblical scholar you could take in a fight? Oh, gosh. Not Annette, but yeah, there are an awful lot of folks I think I could take, but I would not want to hurt any of them. And so I'm a lover, not a fighter. Put it that way. The ruling in the Talmud that angels can't understand Aramaic is largely agreed to be against angel cults, Seth. That's another great observation. Okay. Mike, sorry for the delay. If the sexual hierarchy of domination thing was a big deal, why is there no explicit women must not be on top during sex statement in the Bible? Because there's the Bible, there's a lot of stuff that's not in the Bible that they still lived. What is in the Bible, though, probably was not ever enforced, at least the collections themselves. This is another thing that a lot of people don't realize. The scholarly consensus is that the legislation that we have in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy was never actually enforced in ancient Israel. It's propaganda. It was for scribal exercises and propaganda. And so it was only really circulating among the elites. And there was no doubt overlap with actual on-the-ground jurisprudence. But we see it in the same kinds of law codes that we find in Mesopotamia, where we actually have lawsuits and court cases and judgments, and not a single one ever cites one of the law codes. And they often don't agree with what the law codes say, indicating that these law codes were for show. And the courts just did whatever they wanted to do. And so the same is almost certainly true of the legislation that we have in the Hebrew Bible. This is propaganda. And so it probably, they just didn't have any reason to say, oh yeah, by the way, no reverse cowgirl or whatever. But we do have other texts like in the Talmud where it says, it's very brief. But basically says if a woman is on top, then the man is stricken with dalaria, which scholars think is probably a reference to diarrhea. And then we have Mesopotamian sex omens, where it says if a woman is on top, then the man loses his vitality, his personal god, for a month. So the idea being she has robbed him of his masculinity because she has taken the role of the dominant role while he has taken the submissive role. And that's common for literally thousands of years. But thank you for the question, Paul. Early Christians believe in salvation by faith. I think Paul is one who probably pushes that most vociferously, but they probably had a variety of different perspectives that included a good mix of faith/work stuff. Because in Matthew, in the Gospels, the idea is very clearly do, the one who does my commandments. And then you also have James, who pushes back, I think, against Paul a little bit. So there were probably a lot of different perspectives. But because Paul is so gung-ho about getting rid of the law, I think he's probably the one most incentivized to argue for salvation entirely and exclusively by faith, which leads to other implications that bubble to the surface within later Christianity. Okay. How long we've been at this? Okay, I think I've got about 25 minutes left. Hopefully I can get to everybody. I'm sorry if I am not able to get to your question. Simone Bat-Yochai says, the most interesting angel worship thing to me is the unique cherub circle. I need to look more into that. I need to look more into that as well. Okay, Kevin Burnett, thank you for the question. Dan, enjoy your work. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. UK fan and LDS here. What do you think of Pope's move to UK? You a fan now? Got to be a UK championship within 2 years, right? I don't know anything about that. Pope's move to UK. I've got to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. I thought you may have been talking about the Pope, and I was like, he moved to the UK. Okay. So you don't mean United Kingdom, you mean University of Kansas. Is that what you mean? I'm sorry, that went right over my head. Yes, BYU's head coach, Mark Pope. That's right. Okay, now I remember. Now I have an idea what you're talking about. Maybe wouldn't be a huge surprise. I have my brother. No, Kentucky, not Kansas. Is that? Yeah, Kentucky. That would be cool if so. I was thinking I had Kansas in my head because my brother almost went to law school at UK, and he ended up going to Washburn instead, just down the street a little bit. I doubt there'll be a championship, but actually, Kentucky's no slouch. We'll see. I'm sorry, that one caught me off guard. But that would be cool if he does win a championship. Probably not for all the BYU recruits that he left behind. Old school. Thank you so much for the question. Marcus Vincent, Jack Bull / Marcion research. Any thoughts? I don't think I know specific positions about Marcion from them. Hang on just a second. Is this about which comes first or Marcion? If it's about the which comes first, I actually think there may be something to the claim that that Marcion preserved or had access to an earlier version of Luke. I happen to think that the version that we have has been edited, and specifically that chapters 1 and 2 were added. And I think there could be more, but I have not done a ton of research into that, so I don't know all the details of the questions, but I think there's definitely something to that. Tony B, thank you so much. David was forgiven, 2 Samuel 12, for murder due to repentance without blood sacrifice, and also asked Hashem not to take Holy Spirit from him, Psalm 51. Why is Jesus's blood required for both in NT? Because this is a later group of people trying to rationalize things for themselves. And I think one has to consider that the followers of Jesus probably did not expect him to die, and it was not until after his death and rumors of his resurrection began to spread that they began to renegotiate what Jesus's mission was, and his blood sacrifice became one way to think of his role in salvation. I think the earliest Christianity is marked by pluriformity and disagreement, and only begins to become unified and aligned behind specific soteriological frameworks after you get the development of the church institution, which is able to kind of enforce more unity. So I think it's a long-term development, but you can find conflict throughout the Hebrew Bible regarding forgiveness. It's not one consistent thing. And so just one example from 2 Samuel isn't going to force early Christians to accept that there didn't have to be blood sacrifice, especially when they're trying to figure out what to do with a Messiah who already died. So I think just the vicissitudes of history contributed to that. Julia, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Viscount Julian, thanks. Any edited volumes like Blackwell Companions on Canaanite culture / religious practices? I know these claims are false, just need a scholarly ref. I'm not thinking of any off the top of my head, but let's see. Oh, we got Susan Neidich in 2016 edited the Wiley Blackwell Companion to Ancient Israel. That's probably going to have some discussion of that. Sawyer in 2006, Blackwell Companion to the Bible and Culture. Purdue 2001, Blackwell Companion to the Hebrew Bible. Geez, there's going to be an awful lot of overlap between those three. What is this? A Companion to the Ancient Near East, edited by Daniel Snell. I know I've used this for something, but from 2005 is a Blackwell volume that's going to talk an awful lot about the economy and stuff like that, and culture and heritage of the ancient Near East. That might have something to say about some of the representations of Canaanites, but let me see if I can come up with something more. What is this? So here's an edited volume that might be helpful. Egypt, Canaan, and Israel. History, Imperialism, Ideology, and Literature. Let me just pop that up on the screen. You can take a look. Proceedings of a conference at the University of Haifa back in 2009. So the date on this is 2011. Probably going to have quite a bit about representation of the other. Oh, not a ton of papers there. Actually, I don't know how helpful that would be. Yeah, those are some options. I don't know that that they get directly at your question, however. But thank you for the question and for the follow-up. And I'm sorry I couldn't provide you something a little more useful. Risikio, thank you so much. Did anyone ever work Arthur Evans' discovery of the Minoan tree and pillar cult into research of Canaanite Asherah and her poles? Probably. I mean, I know it's been mentioned in passing. I don't know that it has formed the foundation of any kind of argument. I'm just poking around in some of the Asherah literature. Don't see anything that's very clearly going to. Well, here, let me see if this does it. Okay, so there are a handful of mentions of that figure in David Sugimoto's edited volume, Transformation of a Goddess, Ishtar, Astarte, Aphrodite, which is from 2014. And it's a collection of a bunch of different papers. But it brings up Asherah and also the Minoan tree and pillar cults a few times, but again, I don't know that's like the focus of any actual paper. I think it's probably just mentioning it in passing, but that would be interesting to look a little more deeply into. Thank you for the question, JLK. Thank you so much. Hi, Dan. I just want to say thank you for your outspoken support of LGBTQIA plus people. I am humbled by that. I appreciate it. I do what I can. As a queer person, when I feel wearied by the hate that I often hear, I return to your videos and feel seen, validated, and accepted. Again, that's very appreciated. I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate that very much, and I only hope that I can continue to be helpful. And I'm so sorry that we live in a world where people find so much value in dehumanizing and marginalizing and oppressing others, particularly for such an asinine reason. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate it very much. Retro Macman, thank you so much. Are there any apocryphal scripture that would recommend as far as spiritual truths or just intriguing insight into that history of Christianity? I don't really comment on spiritual truths. For me, it's all intriguing insight. But there's a lot that's in the Bible that seems to consider spiritual truths to be found in some of that apocryphal literature. We've already talked about how Enoch is quoted. There are references to the Maccabees. Ben Sira is considered an important piece of wisdom literature. When it comes to New Testament Apocrypha, the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas were considered pretty significant by early Christians. But I don't really have anything to say about what are spiritual truths in there. But thank you for the question. And yeah, there are a couple of different publications. One's called the New Testament, which includes a bunch of pseudepigraphical and apocryphal New Testament texts that you might be interested in. And another is called The Other Gospels, edited by Bart Ehrman and another individual whose name I'm forgetting at the moment. But that includes translations and introductions to dozens of different non-canonical texts within which you might be able to find what you're looking for. Matthew Tracy, thank you so much. Similarities and differences between early Christianity and early Hasidim. Excuse me. I thought that was Hasidism. Both appear to share a view of a divine creator coming to a fallen earth and administering to the lowest of the low. Yeah, I think you have, when you have these traditions and these ideologies and worldviews growing out of communities that are kind of under the boot of larger empires and geopolitical forces, I think they're going to promote the interests of the lower classes, because that's where they're coming from. That's the experience they have, which is one of the reasons that a lot of people didn't really like the taste of the book of Revelation, was because it was kind of saying, we want to be in charge. But I don't know anything about any comparative work done on the two of them, but I think it probably has to do with systemic power asymmetries they were looking to confront and overcome as they grew. Guy Thevenin, I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. Thank you so much. Ever do live events in SLC any soon? My podcast co-host and I are planning on doing something this summer, an in-person event somewhere in Salt Lake City. We're not sure exactly what to do yet, but we do have something in the works. So I will keep you all posted. Jonathan Thorson, ASMR. Thank you so much for the question, Jonathan. So if all sin is equal, I don't know that I would agree with that. That is a claim made in the Bible, or at least consistently in the Bible. Why don't Christians' powers that be campaign against alcohol abuse, infidelity, etc., with the same fervor and financial investments that they apply to LGBTQ issue? It's because they don't actually consider all sins to be equal. That's rhetoric. They're primarily, and also because they're primarily interested in structuring power and values and boundaries in ways that serve their own interests. And that is going to involve whatever has become useful identity markers. And since the 70s, the religious right has made things like abortion, the LGBTQ plus community, and issues like that main identity markers. And so those are going to be the things that Christian groups and institutions are going to hammer on the most. Unfortunately, they can't make it poverty and healthcare and things like that, because those identity markers are a means to an end. And the end has to do with their own power structures rather than advancing the interests of all people in the world. So it is something that I lament regularly. But thank you for the question. Tony B., thank you so much. How are the Torah and Paul's roles of women compatible with Deborah the judge and prophetess in a major leadership role within ancient Israel? They're not, because Paul wasn't really dealing with a pre-exilic worldview regarding women. Paul was dealing with a Greco-Roman worldview regarding women, and those stories were just stories from the past. Paul was embedded in a deeply patriarchal culture, and for the most part tried to rationalize and defend that culture, or at least the parts of that culture that resonated with Paul, which were incredibly patriarchal. Although whoever's responsible for the pastoral epistles and for the interpolation in 1 Corinthians 14 was even more misogynist than Paul. So, and who knows what upset that person. Oh, shoot, I have neglected. The Patreon again. Did you ever watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? I watched a few episodes. I couldn't really get into it, though. There's a right and wrong answer here. I probably got that answer wrong. I apologize. LOL. The Pope has decided to move the Vatican to the land of the Saxons in Essex in a time of troubles is anticipated, isn't it? Jonathan Thorson should read up on Christian temperance movements and the social gospel in late 19th and into early 20th century. Fundamentalism is in part a reaction to social gospel and its influence on unionization. That's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up. That was the wrong answer. See, I told you. I have so little time for TV these days, and more I only go to TV to unwind and relax, in which case I usually want to watch something that's going to make me laugh, and which more and more these days means British comedy, whether chat shows or panel shows or the big fat quiz. Those things bring me joy. And Jimmy Carr, as much as I get frustrated with him on some things, is just hilarious. Ed Lima, thank you so much for the comment. I know you like Metallica. What other metal bands? They're I think I don't know that there are other bands that I would say I like anything from the band, but there are definitely songs from Megadeth and Motorhead, Five Finger Death Punch, that I really like. What other metal bands? Ghost is fun. There are a handful of Ghost songs that I really have enjoyed. Slipknot, is that metal? I enjoy some Slipknot, even though maybe that's not metal. What's the other band? I mean, I don't know if you consider Black Sabbath metal. I think like Black Sabbath invented metal to some degree, but oh gosh, now I've forgotten his name. Yeah, I forget some of the other names. It's mainly songs that I've got popping into my head now. Slipknot is new metal, so is Korn, so is Crazy Town. I have what concert did I go see? Did I see Korn? Yes, I saw Korn in 1999, 2000, somewhere around there, where they were on tour. It was like the loudest concert ever, and Stained opened up for them. And Stained was the best part of the show. I was like, we can go now. Yeah, I can't think of all the others. I could go through my my old CD collection downstairs, but that would take way too long. At Woodstock 99. No, I wasn't at Woodstock 99. Steve Acosta, thank you so much. Dan, you are brilliant when it comes to biblical scholarship. That's very kind of you. Thank you. But do you know movies? I do know movies. What movie is this quote from? You want a toe? I can get you a toe. Hell, I can get you a toe by 3:00 today. That is The Big Lebowski. That's Walter lecturing the dude in the cafe. And he's going to sit there and finish his coffee. But thank you for the question. Ethan Sweetland, thank you so much for the contribution. I appreciate it. Let's see. Dan is terrified of preterism. I wouldn't say I'm terrified. Annoyed by it sometimes, sure, but not terrified. Hey, Dan, how long does it take you to read those books behind you? Like a week or so? It depends. Like I've started some of these books and will probably never finish them. Some of them I only got because I needed like one chapter out of it. And so that's all I read. Some of them I sat down and I read them from beginning to end. There are a couple of them I read within a single day. Like I wanted this book a lot and sat down and read the whole thing in a single day. Usually it takes me about a week, maybe 2 weeks to work my way through an academic book. But I have less and less time these days, which is something that's been frustrating me. Dr. Bowen's book also has an excellent and easily available audiobook version. Oh, I didn't know he did an audiobook version of that. I would highly recommend that then. I hope your back isn't too bad, Dan. Thank you, Carrie. I don't know what I did to it, but I couldn't move for several days. Worst it's ever been. Had to go into a urgent care, and now I've got the stuff, and things are feeling better. What are we looking at? Oh, got a couple minutes, and I'm gonna have to go. Although I get a lot of crap when it comes to music. Like if I want to write and I just want to focus, I like having background noise. So I will turn on like Dave Matthews Band, and a bunch of my friends give me so much crap for that. But that is like the most relaxing music to me. And I was even supposed to go to a Dave Matthews Band concert here in Utah a few years ago, and it ended up that I was in Israel and Palestine over that week. So I had to give my ticket to my wife, and she took her best friend, and they had a great time. And I was annoyed that I had to miss that. Ethan, thank you so much for the question. Hello, Dan. I've heard you say that you are not an atheist. That is correct. I'm just curious, are you agnostic? No, I would not say I'm agnostic either. What do you actually believe in personally if you are a person of faith? I know you come from Mormonism. I don't come from Mormonism. I am a Latter-day Saint. I'm an adult convert to the LDS Church. But I don't talk about my faith on social media or in public because I have compartmentalized my my public content creation only for my scholarship, and I keep my scholarship and my faith separate, and never the twain shall meet. So unfortunately, I get questions absolutely every single day of my life about that, but I do not answer them. That is something I keep private, and I know that's not going to stop people from speculating, and nothing I can do about that. But yeah, what I believe and my faith and how I reconcile stuff, that is all not for public consumption. Jacob says, most biblical studies graduate degrees I'm seeing make you pick whether to specialize in Hebrew Bible / Old Testament or New Testament or Second Temple Judaism, but you're able to do both. How can an aspiring grad student ensure they're able to do both and not get locked into specializing only on half of the Bible? It's not easy, but there are some things that you can specialize in that make it a little bit easier. Second Temple Judaism tends to help because you need to do, you're going to do some New Testament, you're going to do some Hebrew Bible. If you look at the Septuagint, you're going to be dealing with Greek, which means that's going to help you deal with the New Testament, but you're going to have to do Hebrew Bible as well. Textual criticism is probably the more difficult one because those two fields, New Testament textual criticism and Hebrew Bible textual criticism, are so separated from each other, dogmatically so in some cases, where people, like I did my Oxford master's thesis was on textual criticism of the Septuagint, and I have New Testament textual critics tell me all the time I need to stay in my lane and stop trying to talk about textual criticism of the New Testament. Yeah, it's not easy, but you're not lashed down to your doctoral dissertation. Like, you can do your PhD, your dissertation, and then you can move into other areas as long as you're widely read enough, and as long as you're engaging with the other folks who are in that field. They won't say, "Hey, you're not allowed here. Your dissertation 20 years ago was on this other thing." So I think that's kind of what I do. Like my dissertation was on Hebrew Bible, but I still try to annoy New Testament scholars as much as possible. So but yeah, it is a little frustrating how siloed some of that can be. But thank you for, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I had Ethan's question up the whole time. I apologize. That question came from Jacob Bennett from the Patreon Discord. Daniel Wesley, thank you so much. Jude's authoritative use of First Enoch was my final straw in rejecting inerrancy. Why doesn't this issue get more attention outside of academia? Just because it is such, it complicates the idea of inerrancy, and so people have to come up with reasons why it doesn't count. And thoughtful people just don't really take those rationalizations very seriously, and so it's easier for people to just kind of look the other way and ignore it. Okay, I'm going to answer the last couple questions, and then I've got to go. What is that tall hat? What is that tall hat statues of El are wearing? Similar to Pharaoh's crown? Yes, it is based on the hat. And shoot, I forgot what the. It's not Asaph. Oh, I used to know the name of that hat. It is based on that. Does the Pope's hat come from this? No, the Pope's hat does not come from this. The Pope's hat comes from a Phrygian cap, and the shape kind of changed and was developed in the medieval period. Can you draw a new pic of what they thought God looked like when he visited Abraham? I could, yeah. I think that because ancient Israel was pretty small and it was not socially stratified, anywhere near the degree it was in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, They would have adopted things here and there from the larger empires around them, but they would have kept things pretty simple. So the deity would have probably just looked like any other wealthy individual traveling around. And you kind of see that where when they encounter God, it's not clear to them that they're not encountering a human. And we got another question from Hachinijuku. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly on the Discord. Who would have known that Tang from The Simpsons was the great poet? People give me a hard. I use that the great poet said just to be facetious, and I have been surprised how many people give me a hard time about that. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even put up the right question. So Hand of Omega, thank you for that question about the tall hat. And give me just 2 seconds, and I'm going to pull up my dissertation because I know the name of that hat is in my dissertation. Atef crown. It's an Atef crown. That's what it is. I'm sorry. Just remembered. But yes, the conical hat that El wears is related to that. And then when you have the horns too. Ethan Sweetland, would you collab with Religion for Breakfast? Absolutely. Andrew's a friend of mine, and we actually have some stuff in the works. I don't think I'm at liberty to say anything at the moment, but yeah, we've got a collaboration on the back burner. We're probably both wishing we had more time to dedicate it to it right now, but we also have a lot of other things going on. But yeah, I'll be doing something with Andrew soon. So let me just try to catch up with the... What's incredible is you are a doctorate of ancient Greek, etc., and shred most modern Christian views, but yet you offer no critique of your faith you hold that has zero credible literature. Everything I shred of modern Christian views, not everything, but most of the things I shred of modern Christian views overlap with the views in my own faith. So none of my videos are supportive of LDS doctrines. Pretty much all of them flatly contradict or undermine them. So just like I don't talk about my faith, but I will happily correct criticisms that imagine that I am defending my faith. I am doing absolutely no such thing whatsoever. And if you think I am, you don't understand my faith or my scholarship. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate your time, your attention, your patience with me. I appreciate some wonderful questions, and I am very appreciative that you support me in my work. As I try to say every time I do one of these live streams, I wouldn't be able to do what I am doing if it were not for your support. So it means everything to me, and I want to continue to make sure that I'm providing a product that has value to you. I hope you have a safe place to stay tonight. I hope you have enough food on the table. I hope you have people around you that love you. And I hope you, for as long as you've been here, whether you've been engaging or not, I hope it has been entertaining, if not educational. And I will see you all around. Bye, everybody.